In terms of the container deposit scheme, I'm very disappointed in Senator Ruston's analysis. Shows she completely misunderstands the whole reason we had a Senate inquiry in the first place, because, to my knowledge, 20 million agricultural containers aren't consumed outside the home by individuals and left lying around as rubbish, which is exactly the reason container deposits schemes were set up around the world in the first place. And I totally agree that anyone who uses a container or beverage container should be responsible for the disposal of those containers. Unfortunately, human nature tends to intervene, and no matter what fines and infringements we place on people, which I'm sure Senator Ruston, coming from one of the cleanest states in Australia, would agree with, they don't seem to work. We still get litter and we still get rubbish. And unfortunately, that rubbish and that litter ends up not only in our environment, it ends up in our waterways and in our oceans. And it breaks down into millions of pieces and finds its way into our sea life. Studies all around the world are now showing the ingestions of plastic from things such as container deposits, such as from containers, plastic containers, as far as the plankton food chain. Now, we know from packaging that 50% of beverage containers are consumed outside the home. And what was fascinating to me going to South Australia recently was to see how well curbside recycling is working with container deposit schemes. South Australia, Senator Ruston's home state, achieves some of the highest recycling rates in the world. 85% or 84% of containers consumed outside the home are recycled. Now, this is the key point. We have curbside recycling, and that's fantastic. Nobody disagrees with that. But that's what's consumed inside the home. Now, your chemical drums, which I must say my vineyard doesn't use because we're organic, and I am a green, but there's also non-green people who are also organic, 20-litre drums of chemicals, to make this point very clear, are not considered rubbish that people take to barbecues with them. I've never seen someone turn up at a barbecue with a 20-litre drum of chemicals. I've never seen someone go along to the football and dispose of a 20-litre drum of chemicals outside their window, or leave it after visiting a rock concert with a 20-litre drum of chemicals. It is an entirely inappropriate comparison to make, and it shows you a complete lack of understanding of our rubbish problem in this country. And it's not just Australia, Senator Ruston, that has implemented container deposit schemes. They've been successfully implemented all around the world. In fact, they started in the US to solve this problem exactly. How do we go from A to B and stop people from littering? Well, we can't. What we can do is actually work on the incentive that human nature responds to by actually putting a value on the rubbish that people leave lying around. So human nature lets us down on the left hand because people unfortunately litter when they're not supposed to, and on the right hand, people are prepared to go out and collect that rubbish. Why are they prepared to collect that rubbish? Because there's an economic value on it, and it is called a market-based instrument. It is putting a price on pollution. It is using a market system. It is the most efficient system we have for solving our rubbish problem, and it is a market-based system. So if you want to start sledging and throwing around comparisons for people who are on the left or the right and talking about regulation, that's actually using a market and a price signal to solve the problem. It's a very different point to what you were trying to make about the Greens being heavy on regulation. This, in fact, is not a regulation in the strictest sense of the word. It is an incentive. It is not a tax, as the Food and Grocery Council try and make out. It is a levy that provides an incentive for people to do the right thing. Now let's talk about South Australia, and I was very pleased to go there and see how proud they were of this container deposit scheme in their own state. 84% of all beverage containers are recycled. The Food and Grocery Council and other lobby groups for the beverage industry try to make out that the Packaging Covenant, a co-regulatory approach that relies on volunteer agreements, is the best way to go. They couldn't provide any evidence as to how much packaging was consumed outside the home and how much of that was recycled, because their statistics rely on curbside recycling, not rubbish outside the home. That is what container deposit schemes were set up for, and that is what we were looking at in the inquiry. It was also interesting for me to note that a state that was so proud of its scheme was surprised when the inefficiencies in those schemes were highlighted by a number of the key players. And let me say it's a lot worse in the Northern Territory, where a new scheme's been implemented and a large number of inefficiencies exist. I went to the Northern Territory and I sat and watched people stand in the sun and the dust for an hour with their children, waiting to get their cans and bottles counted, because people inside the depot were having to split 24 different ways every single container that came into their depot. It took them over an hour and a half to get their money before they left. Now that is a very inefficient system. All the participants we spoke to in the chain, including the beverage companies who own the super collectors, also agreed the systems were inefficient. They could be done much better. So, in terms of rolling out a national scheme, yes, I agree with Senator Ruston. Every state should take note of existing schemes in the Northern Territory and South Australia. Most definitely take note of what you can do better and what you can do more efficiently. And there is absolutely no doubt from the inquiry, the Senate inquiry into container deposit schemes, that we can do them a lot more efficiently. And the use of new technology, only recently become evident in both South Australia with recycling depots and also in the Northern Territory, will significantly reduce costs of the scheme. It's also my view and the view of the Greens that beverage companies should not be part of the scheme. They should not be super collectors. There's inherent conflicts of interest for companies who are fundamentally and ideologically opposed to using container deposit schemes being part of the system. It's like putting the fox in charge of the hen house. There's no incentive there whatsoever for them to improve the schemes, and we believe that the inquiry has proven there is profiteering in the South Australian scheme with Coca-Cola, and that's been outlined in our dissenting report. So, yes, future states or a national scheme, beware of container deposits in South Australia and Northern Territory. There are things you need to know, and there are significant ways we can improve these schemes. But the one thing that the EPA in South Australia did point out, and most South Australians I talk to who are very proud of this scheme, is that in terms of its environmental aim and objective, that is increasing recycling and removing rubbish from outside the home disposal, it is highly effective. 84% of all beverage containers sold in that state are recycled because of the scheme, because of this market-based instrument that puts a price on plastic pollution and bottles and cans and gives people incentive to get off their backside and pick them up and take them back to a depot. And if they won't do it, kids will. Nearly everyone I saw at the depots in South Australia and Northern Territory were children with their parents. It's children making money. It's Boy Scouts, it's church groups, it's community groups profiting from a scheme that distributes that income around the state. It also provides a fantastic opportunity to aggregate other forms of waste. The South Australian Container Deposit Scheme has revolutionised recycling in that state, and I believe it will do so for every state that adopts it. The packaging scheme, the way it is at the moment, in terms of the covenant, does not provide an integrated scheme for integrating waste, particularly things such as e-waste and other types of waste that we saw being brought in by the same people who were there to cash in their containers. So it could also be rolled around this country by using private investment at no cost to the beverage companies and at no cost to the taxpayers. We believe there's a market solution for this right around the country, and we also believe that new technologies being trialled will allow the scheme to run very efficiently and very cost effectively. And there's no doubt in my mind at all, from my visits to South Australia and Northern Territory, that this could revolutionise the way we recycle in Australia. And I certainly like the reports that Boomerang Alliance have put out on a Tasmanian-based scheme, creating 300 new jobs with 7 depots around the states. And also, hopefully, given all the awful garbage that I've seen lying around the Tamar River in the last 2 weeks, of which we've done media on, that we could also improve our recycling rates and take plastic out of our rivers and out of our oceans where we know it is damaging marine life and it is the biggest source of pollution in our oceans.
Thank you, Senator Whish-Wilson.